Good morning, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this distinguished panel. After the previous speakers, I would refrain from making general comments on the phenomenon of globalization. I am not really the right person to do so, but I would like to focus on Switzerland. And I would like to focus on three questions regarding Switzerland. The first one is, what role actually does globalization play for Switzerland, and how has Switzerland dealt with the structural changes in the last years? The second one is, how is Switzerland affected by the developments that we have seen, like the new trade policy in the US or the decision on Brexit? Finally, I would like to deal with the issue, how do we ensure or can we ensure that we continue to reap the benefits of this development, but we also take into account what we have heard this morning are losers or people that are perceive themselves as being losers. So starting with the first one, what role does globalization play in Switzerland? I think it is quite clear to everybody we are a small, open economy, heavily dependent on trade. And just let me give you a few figures on that. More than 40% of total demand comes from outside of Switzerland. The export is, we export about 63% of our total GDP or GNP, which is nearly 2 out of 3 francs that we earn outside our country. Then if you look at the sum of exports and imports for goods and services at the development in the last 20 years, this share has risen from 69% to 94%. And finally, if we look at foreign direct investment, we have foreign direct investment of about 1,120 billion, which is providing for about 2 million jobs outside of Switzerland. In the contrary, we have about 800 billion FDI in Switzerland providing for about 500,000 jobs. So you see a very heavily integrated economy in the world. Now, globalization has changed somewhat the trade pattern also for Switzerland. With those global value chains becoming more and more important, it was important that companies in Switzerland can integrate into these into these global value chains and actually produce value-added products. So in order to do this, we are dependent on open markets. We are dependent to be able to import, but we are, of course, also be able to export and compete successfully on foreign markets. This has also the effect of ensuring that internally in Switzerland we we ensure competitiveness, and this in turn fosters innovation. Now, also in Switzerland we have critical voices saying that, this globalization creates losers, or maybe, as I was saying before, that people think that they may become losers at a certain point. Maybe they're not today, but they may become in the future. And I think that these adjustment policies Professor Balcerowicz was talking about, they have been quite successfully implemented in Switzerland for a long time. And I would like to show this also by saying that structural change in Switzerland has been quite smooth. If we look at the last 20 years, 860,000 jobs have been actually created. Of course, in other sectors than we had 20 years ago. But we have jobs and we have this very low unemployment share. So what are the reasons? I think there are several. I would just like to point 3 of these. And I think everything starts with education. Education has been mentioned also before. We have an education system that ensures that the young people actually learn jobs or are prepared for jobs that are asked by the market. And this is thanks to or due to our dual vocal education system, which was under heavy critic still 10 years ago, but after the financial crisis, I can assure you, everybody thinks they would like to introduce the same system as we have, which of course everybody's free to do, but it's not so easy to do just from one day to the other. So this is really a very important and very powerful tool. Next to this education comes continuous education, and continuous education is something we are still trying to improve. Whether you're 30, 40, 50, or even 60, this will be the key to future success. Second thing is labor market, flexibility of labor markets. And I think there we have shown that we could keep these labor markets flexible. There are always attacks against the flexibility of this labor market, but thanks to the social partnership that we have and that is still functioning well, we can ensure that this flexibility is still there. And finally, if really somebody is not capable of either adapting to new job requirements or doesn't find a job after all, we have a very well established social security system which ensures that in the end nobody falls somewhere between the different nets. So all in all, I think we are well equipped, which does not mean that we just have to wait and don't do anything, but we have to continue to make sure that we can keep these advantages and these adjustment policies as we have them. Now I come to the second point: how is Switzerland affected by things like US trade policy and Brexit, as both are explained, at least in part, by anti-globalization reactions or protectionist reactions. By the way, I am often asked, has protectionism actually risen in the last few years? And if you look at studies, it's very unclear whether it has. But if you take the FMI, then the FMI says that 75% of the slowing of trade is not due to protectionist measures, but to less investment. So if you would have more investment, you would also see more trade. However, it's still extremely important for us to fight protectionist measures, to fight all these trade measures that are implemented, but that have been implemented since we have seen the other side of the issue, maybe the opening up. Now, does US trade policy affect Switzerland? I am often asked whether what happens in the US actually has a direct effect. I think it's still unclear, because except having decided not to ratify TPP and to taking many more safeguard measures, but in areas that are not directly touching on Switzerland, like in the steel area, I think it is very difficult already to see what the trade policy of the US would be. One thing I must say makes me a little bit worried and concerned, and is the fact that the United States doesn't seem to care anymore so much about the multilateral trading system. They want bilateral agreements, bilateral trade relations are important, and the basis of all our relationship in Switzerland and of many other countries is the WTO, is the multilateral trading system, which has been championed by the US for many, many years. It is there thanks to the US. Which in the 40s created the GATT. So this fact that there is this view that maybe multilateralism is not in favor of the United States, this is difficult for a country like Switzerland, very much dependent on a rules-based and not a power-based system. And you see this, for instance, lately from the fact that there is a very important dispute settlement system in WTO, and the United States does not agree to fill the vacancies in the appellate body, which means that at some point the appellate body will not be able anymore to take judgments, which is a kind of first erosion of the system. Also, the preparations for the next ministerial seems to be difficult, so this is something which I ask myself. Hopefully the United States will change and see that it's also in their benefit to keep multilateralism. As I said, bilateral trade agreements are important. We will see what NAFTA what the results of the NAFTA negotiations will be. We have also seen the heavy emphasis on bilateral trade deficit. You know that Switzerland has also been looked at. We don't think that we are a problem, because we have quite a large surplus, but it is because of pharmaceutical exports of precision instruments, exports of watches, and this is not where the United States or where the administration sees the problems. So the next months or years will show. It is still very difficult to say what the future will bring. Now, how does Brexit affect Switzerland? Well, first of all, the UK is a very large trading partner for us. It is the 6th most important trading partner and the 5th most important destination for goods. Huge FDI on both sides. 150 passenger flights a day between the UK and Switzerland. And so the aim, of course, for us is what we call mind the gap, or avoid the cliff edge. That is, keep things as they are, even improve them if you can. And this is the mandate we have received from the Federal Council. Now, this is quite a challenge. We have good, very informal discussions with our British colleagues, because as you know, until they have not exited the EU, they're not supposed to negotiate. So we don't negotiate, but we have very informal, interesting discussions about what happens if, and we have many ifs. Now, the one thing that makes me also there a little bit concerned is that whatever we will do, or whatever we will be able to do, will depend on what the UK does with the EU. Now, as long as they keep a level which is similar to the level they have today, then we might be able to avoid the cliff edge or to mind the gap. But if after the transition period, which is now foreseen, there will be a pure free trade agreement, or maybe even a bit better a free trade agreement, but without harmonization with the EU, then we will face a problem, because we cannot be harmonized with two different partners at the same time. So there we will see also there what happens, how the relationship will look at. And as you have certainly followed, it is even the first step is not so easy, namely the leaving, but you can imagine how difficult it is afterwards to negotiate the future relationship. So how can we ensure that we can reap the benefits of globalization? We have 3 prongs which we follow, which is, first of all, you will not, and it's not because I've been a long-time negotiator at the WTO, but I am convinced WTO is the general basis for everything we do on trade, even in relationship with the EU. With all these agreements we have, 120, the basis is the WTO. So it is really an important matter that this organization keeps its credibility. Of course, it has to find new ways of developing. We have seen that rounds, as we have known them, as the Uruguay round, the last one, are not really will not prove to be successful in the future. So we will see. We will have to invent other means to be able to ensure that WTO remains an important and credible basis. What do we do? Many free trade agreements. Many free trade agreements. We have about 28 agreements with 38 countries, apart from the ones with the EU and EFTA. And if we look at the trade that is covered by all these agreements, including the ones with the EU, it's more than 80%. The ones missing is actually the United States, which is about 10% of our trade, and then several other countries like the Mercosur countries, so Brazil, Argentina, and these countries. And of course, Russia. Russia we were negotiating, but we have decided to suspend because of political reasons. Now, these negotiations are not easy. Because we, of course, request a lot of opening in industrial, but we are quite reluctant to open up our agriculture, which for many countries is the main interest. Now, with the decisions of the Federal Council of 10 days ago, I hope this will change. I hope we will be able to do a little bit more in terms of agriculture opening, but this will remain quite a challenge. Then we have all the issues of intellectual property, of sustainability, so these negotiations have become more and more difficult. Finally, before concluding, a word about the EU. I don't want to get too much into this because that would by itself fill a whole intervention, but I would not do justice to the very important relationship we have with the EU if I didn't mention it. It is our most important trading partner. It will remain our most important trading partner. Even if we do free trade agreements with the rest of the world, the EU will remain absolutely core. So we have to ensure that we can continue to ensure that this bilateral relation continue to develop. We have seen some normalization, as we call it lately. You know that after the mass immigration initiative was accepted, we had quite difficult few years with the EU. But thanks to the very thoughtful implementation by our Parliament and now also by the Federal Council in December, I think we have been able to show that we can implement this initiative and be compatible with the free movement of persons at the same time. So I would like to conclude, and as Professor Balcerowicz said, the most interesting part is always a discussion, so I look very much forward to getting many questions to be able to discuss this. Thank you.